Before we descend into the shadows of Isfahan and the silent corridors of espionage, a quick briefing. The stories we tell here expose the machinery of the world that operates while you sleep. If you want to understand the invisible wars being fought for your future, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are declassifying history, one operation at a time. Now let's go dark. The heat in Tehran is different from the heat in Tel Aviv. It is heavier, laden with the exhaust of 3 million cars that ignore lane markers and the dust of the Alborz mountains that loom like silent sentinels over the sprawling metropolis. For the man calling himself Darius Vahidi, the heat was the first thing that hit him when he stepped out of Imam Khomeini International Airport. But it was the silence in his own mind that he had to manage. Darius was a ghost. In the files of the Iranian Ministry of Industry, he was a 42-year-old electrical infrastructure consultant, a prodigal son returning from a decade of lucrative contracting in Germany and Dubai to help modernize his homeland's aging power grid. He had a degree from a technical university in Berlin, a sparse but consistent social media presence showing a man who liked hiking and engineering diagrams, and a passport that had been aged to perfection in a laboratory in Herzliya. In reality, Darius was a Katsa, a field intelligence officer for the Mossad. He was part of the Caesarea unit, the elite division responsible for special operations in denied territories. He was not there to build, he was there to dismantle. The taxi ride into the city was a blur of neon Farsi signage and the chaotic ballet of Tehran traffic. Darius sat in the back, his posture relaxed, his eyes scanning the perimeter not with the anxiety of a spy, but with the weary boredom of a traveler. This was the tradecraft. To be invisible, you must be mundane. You must be the person no one looks at twice. His target was not a person. It wasn't a general or a nuclear scientist. It was a location that didn't officially exist on most public maps, hidden within the folds of the Kojir military complex, east of Tehran. It was the Shahid Hemat Industrial Group's facility, Facility 404. Intelligence gathered by Unit 8200, Israel's Signals Intelligence Corps, indicated that Facility 404 was retrofitting the Shahab-3 missiles with new guidance systems, turning clumsy ballistic rockets into precision weapons capable of striking specific buildings in Tel Aviv. Israel could not airstrike Kojir. The facility was buried under reinforced concrete and mountains of earth, guarded by the S-300 air defense systems recently acquired from Russia. A kinetic strike would require a massive air campaign, inevitably leading to a regional war. The solution, therefore, had to be silent. It had to be internal. It had to look like an accident. Darius arrived at his temporary apartment in the affluent northern district of Elahiya. The apartment was a safe rental procured through a chain of unwitting cutouts. He dropped his bag, checked the window for line-of-sight surveillance, and then poured himself a glass of tap water he knew better than to drink, just to hold the glass. His mission was technically impossible. He had to penetrate the most secure industrial site in the Islamic Republic, bypassing layers of counterintelligence from the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and induce a catastrophic failure in a system designed to be fail-safe. And he had to do it without leaving a single fingerprint, digital or physical. He took a secure comms device, disguised as a heavily modified gaming console component, and sent a single burst transmission to a server in Cyprus, which would bounce it to Tel Aviv. The message was 3 words long. The grid is live. The operation, codenamed Thunderstruck, had officially begun. Facility 404 was a monument to paranoia. To the satellite eyes of the CIA and the Mossad, it appeared as a series of nondescript warehouses tucked into the beige, rocky valleys east of Tehran. But the true scale of the operation lay underground. A labyrinth of tunnels connected assembly halls where solid propellant motors were cast and guidance chips were soldered into nose cones. The security architecture was formidable. The outer perimeter was patrolled by the IRGC, the ideological Praetorian Guard of the regime. The inner perimeter was managed by the Hefazat-e-Etalat, the intelligence protection organization, tasked specifically with preventing espionage. Workers were bussed in from secure housing. Electronics were banned. The air gap, the separation between the facility's computer networks and the outside internet, was absolute. The Stuxnet virus, years earlier, had taught the Iranians a painful lesson. They no longer trusted software. They trusted physics. They trusted concrete, steel, and localized power grids that could not be hacked from a laptop in Maryland or Tel Aviv. Darius spent his first 2 weeks in Tehran establishing his legend. He met with legitimate civil engineering firms, discussing mundane contracts for substation upgrades in civilian sectors. He drank tea in the bazaars, complained about the inflation, and acted every inch the frustrated returnee trying to do business in a bureaucracy-choked system. But every night, he studied the schematics provided by a Sayanim, a volunteer helper, buried deep within the Iranian Ministry of Energy. The schematics detailed the power consumption of the industrial sectors east of the capital. Facility 404 had a weakness. It was a ravenous beast. The centrifuges, the casting ovens for missile propellant, and the climate control systems required massive, consistent amounts of electricity. The facility drew power from the national grid but passed it through a dedicated high-voltage substation known as Node 9. Node 9 was the choke point. It contained massive industrial transformers, stepping down the 400 kilovolt transmission lines to usable industrial currents. These transformers were the lungs of the facility. If they stopped breathing, the missile production suffocated. If they exploded, the resulting fire and electrical surge could travel down the lines, frying sensitive equipment worth billions and setting the solid fuel stockpiles alight. Darius sat in his darkened apartment, the blue light of his encrypted tablet illuminating his face. He wasn't looking at a way to cut the power. Cutting the power would just turn on the backup generators. He needed to poison the power. He needed a voltage spike so violent, so sudden, and so chaotic that it would bypass the breakers and turn the facility's own infrastructure into a bomb. He zoomed in on the schematic of the transformers at Node 9. They were old, Siemens models imported in the early 2000s, likely through sanctions-evading intermediaries. They were robust, but they relied on a specific component to regulate heat and voltage: the on-load tap changer, OLTC. The OLTC is a mechanical gearbox inside the transformer that adjusts the voltage levels hundreds of times a day to keep the output steady. It is a complex mix of oil, gears, and high-voltage contacts. If the tap changer jams, Darius whispered to the empty room, the voltage climbs. But jamming it wasn't enough. He needed it to shift to the highest possible voltage setting while the facility was at peak load, and then disable the safety cutoffs. He needed to trick the transformer into committing suicide, taking the factory with it. To do that, he needed physical access to Node 9, and Node 9 was inside the exclusion zone. Tradecraft is not about climbing fences, it is about getting someone to open the gate for you. Darius knew he could not sneak into Node 9. The motion sensors and thermal cameras would catch a jackal, let alone a man. He needed to be invited. His target was a man named Reza Moradi. Moradi was a senior maintenance supervisor for the regional power distribution company, Tavenir. He was not military, but he held the clearance to service the high-voltage lines that fed the military complexes. Darius had built a profile on Moradi over months. The man was 55, nearing retirement, underpaid, and deeply embittered by the fact that his son had been denied a scholarship to a university in Canada due to the plummeting value of the rial. Moradi was not a traitor, but he was exhausted. Darius orchestrated a meeting. It was not in a dark alley, but at a specialized engineering conference at the Tehran International Permanent Fairground. Darius set up a booth for his shell company, Vahidi Solutions, showcasing advanced German diagnostic tools for power grids. He waited. He knew Moradi would attend. The man loved free technical gadgets. When Moradi approached the booth eyeing a high-end thermal imaging camera, Darius struck. "The resolution on that is military grade," Darius said in Farsi, smiling warmly. "But for a man who knows what he's looking at, it saves hours of climbing towers." Moradi looked up, adjusting his glasses. "It's German. Top of the line. I brought a few in before the latest sanctions tightened up." Darius lied smoothly. "I'm Darius. I'm trying to convince the ministry that we need better diagnostics, but you know how it is." Moradi laughed, a dry, cynical sound. "I know. They want us to fix 1970s equipment with prayers and duct tape." The hook was set. Over the next hour, they talked shop. Darius didn't talk politics. He talked about the frustration of failing infrastructure, the incompetence of middle management, the struggle of being an engineer in a system run by ideologues. He validated Mossadi's professional pride. By the end of the day, Darius had insisted on gifting Mossad a smaller, less expensive diagnostic tool as a sample for a respected colleague. "I can't accept this," Mossad said, though his grip on the device tightened. "Please," Darius insisted. "If you like it, maybe you tell your boss to hire me for a consultation. It's marketing." 2 weeks later, Darius received a call. It was Mossad. The Tavernier company was facing intermittent faults in the eastern sector grids, the civilian lines bordering the military zones. They couldn't isolate the harmonic distortion. Mossad wanted to know if Darius's German equipment could help find the noise. "I'd be happy to look," Darius said, keeping his voice steady. "But I'd need to be near the primary substations to get a clean reading. I can get you a pass for the civilian perimeter," Mossad said. It wasn't Node 9, but it was the first door. The access Mossad provided got Darius close. He was allowed into the switching yards that fed the residential areas of Kojir, just a few kilometers from the missile factory. While Mossad and his team worked on a faulty capacitor bank, Darius deployed his diagnostic tools. These were not standard industry tools. Concealed within the casing of a standard signal analyzer was a passive sniffer developed by Mossad's technical directorate. It was designed to read the electromagnetic leakage from the nearby high-voltage lines. By analyzing the tiny fluctuations in the magnetic fields of the transmission lines heading toward the military zone, Darius could reverse engineer exactly what kind of machinery was running inside Facility 404. He sat in his rented truck, ostensibly calibrating his device. On the screen, the waveforms danced. He saw the signatures. Whir, thump. The massive inductive load of a rotary casting mixer. Hiss crack, the arc furnaces. But then he saw something else. The data stream from the Node 9 transmission lines showed a recurring anomaly. Every day at 14 odd hours, the voltage dipped slightly, then corrected. It was the tap changer in the Node 9 transformer adjusting for the afternoon heat load. But the correction was sluggish. The mechanical signature suggested the gears in the transformer were worn. The oil viscosity was likely high. The maintenance on the military side was just as bad as the civilian side. "They are running at redline," Darius murmured. This was the opening. The system was already stressed. It didn't need a bomb. It just needed a push. The plan formulated in his mind was a hybrid attack. He couldn't hack the air-gapped computers inside the facility, but the tap changer at Node 9 was controlled by an external regulation unit, a box called the AVR, Automatic Voltage Regulator. The AVR monitored the voltage and sent simple electrical pulses to the transformer, step up or step down. If Darius could replace the AVR with a compromised unit, one that looked identical but contained a malicious logic chip, he could take control of the transformer. He could command the tap changer to step up the voltage to maximum 30% above the rated limit. Simultaneously, the malicious chip would disable the overvoltage protection relays. The result would be 400,000 volts crashing into equipment rated for significantly less. The transformer oil would boil instantly. The casing would rupture. The resulting arc flash would be hotter than the surface of the sun, and the surge would travel down the cables into Facility 404, exploding every control panel, centrifuge motor, and guidance system test bench that was plugged in. But swapping a piece of hardware inside a secure substation was physically demanding. He couldn't carry a toolbox over a fence. He needed the replacement part to be installed by the Iranians themselves. The operation shifted gears. Darius signaled Tel Aviv. The target was the supply chain for the AVR units used by the Tavernier company and the military maintenance crews. Mossad's research division identified the supplier. The AVRs were manufactured by a Chinese company, but they were imported into Iran through a front company in Dubai to bypass sanctions. The front company, Gulfstar Logistics, placed orders for spare parts every quarter. The Mossad team in Dubai, operating under deep cover, intercepted the shipping manifest. A shipment of 20 AVR units was scheduled to leave Jebel Ali port for Bandar Abbas in 3 days. This was classic espionage, the kind practiced since the days of the Cold War. A team of Kedan operatives, the tip of the spear, infiltrated the warehouse in Dubai at night. They didn't steal the shipment. They carefully opened the crate marked for the Iranian Ministry of Energy. Working with surgical precision, they removed 3 of the AVR units. In their place, they installed 3 identical replicas fabricated in a Tel Aviv laboratory. These Trojan AVRs were masterpieces of engineering. Externally, they were indistinguishable from the Chinese originals. They had the same serial numbers, the same dust, the same cheap plastic casing. But inside, the circuit board had been modified. A tiny cellular receiver was embedded in the epoxy resin of the board. It was dormant, completely passive, undetectable by standard bug sweepers. It would only wake up if it received a specific, highly encrypted wake-up sequence from a nearby transmitter. Once awoken, the Trojan AVR would behave normally for 24 hours to pass any installation tests. Then, upon receiving a second command, it would execute Protocol 0. It would drive the voltage to the maximum and lock the controls. The operatives resealed the crate, dusted it to remove prints, and vanished. The shipment left for Iran on schedule. Now Darius had to ensure that one of those specific compromised units ended up in Node 9. Back in Tehran, the pressure was mounting. The shipment had arrived in Iran, but there was no guarantee the specific compromised units would go to Node 9. They might end up in a civilian substation in Tabriz or a shopping mall in Shiraz. Darius had to guide the hand of fate. He met with Maradi again. They were at a tea house in the Darban Mountains, the air cool and filled with the smell of grilled meat and hookah smoke. "The noise on the lines is getting worse," Darius said, showing Maradi a fabricated report on his tablet. "I've analyzed the harmonics. It's coming from the regulation units. The AVRs you're using, they're drifting. They can't handle the load swings." Maradi sighed, rubbing his temples. "I keep telling them, we need to replace the AVRs at the main nodes. But the inventory is a mess." "I have a friend in the procurement office," Darius lied. "He told me a new shipment just cleared customs. Better quality Chinese units. If I were you, I'd grab them before they get sent to the provinces. Specifically the batch ending in serial number 88. They have the updated capacitors." Darius handed Maradi a piece of paper with the specific serial numbers of the Trojan units. "Tell your inventory manager these are the only ones compatible with the harmonic filters I installed. If he uses the old ones, the noise will come back." It was a gamble. He was relying on Maradi's trust and the bureaucratic laziness of the Iranian system. If Maradi simply wanted the problem solved, he would demand the specific parts Darius recommended. "I'll see what I can do," Maradi said. "But Node 9 isn't my jurisdiction. It's managed by the military contractors." "But it feeds your grid," Darius pressed gently. "If Node 9 fails, it trips your civilian substations. You have the authority to recommend maintenance for grid stability, don't you?" "Technically, yes." "Then write the work order," Darius said. "Call it a grid stability critical update." They love big words like that. Maradi laughed. "You know our system too well, Darius." Darius smiled, but his eyes were cold. "I just want the lights to stay on." The next few days were agonizing. Darius monitored the encrypted channels. The shipment was processed. The inventory logs, hacked by Mossad cyber teams, showed the crates moving to the central warehouse. Then, a work order appeared in the system. Priority maintenance, Node 9 substation. Component replacement, AVR unit. Maradi had done it. He had pushed the paperwork through. But just as success seemed imminent, the shadows moved. Darius was walking back to his apartment one evening when he noticed a white Peugeot 405 parked down the street. It was empty, but the engine was ticking, cooling down. It hadn't been there when he left. He entered his building but didn't go to his apartment. He went to the roof. Peering over the edge, he saw 2 men in plain clothes exit a shop across the street and stare up at his window. They were Mossad, the paramilitary volunteers often used for low-level surveillance. They weren't hiding. This was a soft knock, a warning that someone was asking questions about the engineer who asked too many questions about the power grid. Darius knew the clock was ticking. If the counterintelligence teams dug too deep into his Darius Vahidi backstop, they might find the cracks in the cement. The university records were solid, but maybe a former professor wouldn't remember him. Maybe a tax record didn't align. He couldn't run. Running would confirm guilt and lead to a lockdown of the facility. He had to brazen it out. He went downstairs, walked out the front door, and marched directly across the street to the two men. "Can I help you?" he asked in Farsi, projecting the arrogance of a wealthy contractor. "You've been staring at my building for 10 minutes. Are you looking to buy, or are you just loitering?" The men were taken aback. They were used to fear, not confrontation. "We are just waiting for a friend," one mumbled. "Wait somewhere else," Darius snapped. "My neighbors are complaining." He turned and walked away, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had bought time with aggression, but the net was closing. The Trojan AVR was scheduled for installation at Node 9 in 48 hours. He had to stay alive until then. The morning the work order was executed, Tehran was blanketed in a suffocating smog. The Alborz Mountains were invisible, swallowed by a gray haze that tasted of diesel and dust. For Darius, the weather was a blessing. Smog scrambled thermal cameras and made long-range visual surveillance difficult. It turned the city into a ghost town of silhouettes. He sat in a coffee shop in the Tajrish district, miles away from Kojir, nursing a lukewarm espresso. On the table, his secure tablet was disguised as a digital newspaper. He wasn't watching the news. He was watching the back-end logs of the Tavernier maintenance server, mirrored through a backdoor exploit. At 0930, the status of Node 9 changed from active to maintenance mode. At 10:15, the log read, "Primary transformer T1 offline. Component swap initiated." At 11:45, the log updated, "AVR unit replaced. Serial number CN889021X. System diagnostic, green." Darius let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The Trojan unit, the specific device modified in Tel Aviv with the malicious logic chip, was now physically bolted onto the transformer that fed the missile factory. The Iranian technicians had installed the bomb themselves, but the device was dormant. To prevent accidental activation during transport or installation, the malicious code was asleep. It required a localized handshake, a specific encrypted radio frequency burst, to wake up and synchronize with the grid's clock. This was the final, most dangerous hurdle. The cellular receiver inside the AVR was low power to avoid detection. It couldn't pick up a signal from a satellite or a distant tower. The wake-up call had to come from close range, within 2 kilometers. Darius had to go back to the perimeter. He left the coffee shop and walked to a nearby park. He retrieved a dead drop left by a local courier, a nondescript plastic bag containing a high-gain directional antenna disguised as a car part, and a prepaid burner phone. He returned to his apartment, but he didn't enter. The white Peugeot 405 was back, parked further down the street this time. 2 men were inside, reading newspapers. They were tightening the noose. If he went upstairs, he might not come down again. He walked past his building without breaking stride, heading for the parking garage where he kept a second vehicle, a battered Saipa Pride, registered to a non-existent university student. He slipped inside the car, checked the mirrors, and drove east. He was going to Kojir. One last time. The drive to the outskirts of the military zone was a lesson in controlled paranoia. Every police checkpoint was a potential trap. Darius stuck to the secondary roads, navigating the industrial sprawl where the city dissolved into scrapyards and walled compounds. He found a vantage point on a ridge overlooking the valley of Kojir. It was a lover's lane, a spot where young couples parked to escape the prying eyes of the morality police. It offered a direct line of sight to the massive pylons of Node 9, roughly 1.8 kilometers away. Darius parked the Saipa between 2 rocks. He assembled the directional antenna, plugging it into the specialized transmitter he had built into the car's dashboard. He checked his watch. 13 more hours. The facility would be ramping up for the afternoon shift. The power draw would be climbing. He aimed the car towards the invisible point in the haze where the substation lay. He keyed the sequence into the transmitter. It wasn't a voice message. It was a digital scream, a complex packet of data sent on a frequency usually reserved for industrial walkie-talkies. Transmission sent, waiting for handshake. The screen blinked. Silence. The interference from the high-voltage lines was massive. The signal might be getting drowned out. He boosted the gain. Transmission sent. Suddenly, a green LED on his dashboard flickered. Handshake received, target active, logic bomb armed. The Trojan AVR had heard him. It was awake. The countdown had begun, but as the green light stabilized, Darius saw movement in his rearview mirror. A black Toyota Hilux was climbing the ridge road. It had the markings of the Sarala Patrol, the IRGC unit responsible for security around sensitive sites. They patrolled these ridges looking for exactly this kind of activity. Darius didn't panic. He disassembled the antenna in seconds, shoving it under the seat. He reclined the driver's seat and pulled a map over his face, feigning sleep. The Hilux slowed as it passed. A spotlight swept over the battered Saipa. Darius lay perfectly still, controlling his breathing. The light lingered for 5 seconds, an eternity, then moved on. The patrol assumed he was just another vagrant or truant sleeping off the afternoon heat. As the taillights of the Hilux faded, Darius sat up. His part was done. The physics would take over now. Inside Node 9, the Trojan AVR sat humming on the control panel of the massive Siemens transformer. To the human operators in the control room, the dials looked normal. The voltage was steady at 400 kV input, stepping down to the industrial levels required by Facility 404. But inside the logic chip of the Trojan unit, the timer hit 0. It was 14:0. Peak load. The solid fuel mixers in the underground bunkers of Facility 404 were spinning at maximum RPM. The guidance system calibration ovens were drawing massive current. The malicious code executed Protocol 0. First, the AVR severed the connection to the safety relays. It blinded the system. The alarms that would normally scream if the voltage spiked were digitally silenced. Then the AVR sent a command to the mechanical tap changer inside the transformer. Step up, step up, step up. The gears inside the transformer, worn and submerged in hot oil, began to grind. They shifted the winding ratio. The output voltage began to climb. From 20 kV to 22 kV, to 25 kV to 30 kV. Inside Facility 404, the lights in the assembly hall flared brilliantly white. The hum of the electric motors changed pitch, rising to a shrieking whine. "Voltage spike!" a technician shouted in the facility's control bunker. "Cut the main breakers!" They tried, but the breakers relied on digital signals from the AVR to trip. The AVR refused to send the signal. The voltage hit 35 kV. Inside the Node 9 transformer, the insulation on the copper windings broke down. The oil, designed to cool the system, flashed into vapor. The pressure inside the steel casing rose from 5 psi to 500 psi in a fraction of a second. The steel tank couldn't hold it. Boom! The explosion at Node 9 was not a firecracker. It was a geological event. The transformer detonated with the force of a tactical bomb. A fireball of burning oil and ionized gas erupted 300 feet into the air. The shockwave flattened the perimeter fence and shattered windows 2 kilometers away. But the real destruction wasn't the explosion, it was the surge. When the transformer died, it sent a final catastrophic pulse of chaotic electricity down the hardened cables leading into the underground facility. This arc flash traveled at the speed of light. It hit the main distribution board of Facility 404. The board vaporized. The surge bypassed the fuses and slammed into the sensitive equipment. In the centrifuge hall, the motors spinning the volatile propellant seized instantly. The sudden stop shattered the mountings. The centrifuges tore themselves apart, slinging highly flammable solid fuel across the room. Sparks from the frying electronics ignited the fuel. In the guidance lab, racks of million-dollar testing equipment popped and smoked. The delicate gyroscopes and processors destined for Shahab-3 missiles were fried instantly. The fire suppression system tried to activate, but its electronic controllers were dead. From his vantage point on the ridge, Darius didn't see the underground chaos. He just saw the flash. A blinding blue-white light that pierced the smog, followed seconds later by a dull, heavy thump that he felt in his chest. Then, the lights in the valley went out. The facility was dark. The smoke began to rise, black, oily smoke that signaled the death of an industrial complex. "Target neutralized," he whispered. Chapter 10. The Lockdown. The euphoria of success lasted exactly 10 seconds. Then the reality of survival set in. The explosion at Node 9 would trigger a massive response. The IRGC, the police, the fire brigades, and the counterintelligence units would swarm the area. They would seal the roads. They would check every vehicle. They would triangulate any signals in the area. Darius threw the Saipa into gear and drove. He didn't go back toward Tehran. That was the natural choke point. He headed east, deeper into the mountains, towards the city of Damavand. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his employer, the Mossad automated system. Code read, Exfiltration Route Alpha compromised. Proceed to Route Bravo. Route Alpha had been a flight from Imam Khomeini Airport using a fake medical emergency. But the explosion had likely grounded all flights or triggered a Level 4 security screen that no legend could withstand. Route Bravo was the hard way, the overland route. Darius drove until the paved road turned to gravel. He ditched the Saipa in a ravine, wiping down the steering wheel and door handles with industrial solvent. He changed his clothes, swapping the engineer's button-down for hiking gear. He put on a backpack containing survival supplies, cash, and a fake ID identifying him as an eco-tourist. He began to hike. The plan was to cross the Alborz Range to a specific mile marker on the highway leading to the Caspian Sea. There, a fixer would be waiting. Back in Tehran, chaos reigned. The regime's media was already spinning the story. An industrial accident at a gas storage facility, the news anchors claimed. But the satellite photos being downloaded in Langley and Tel Aviv told a different story. The heat signature from Facility 404 was blooming. The underground fires were burning out of control. The Hafazat-e-Etalat, intelligence protection, was not fooled by the news reports. They knew this was sabotage. They began sweeping the logs of the cell towers near Kojir. They were looking for the ghost signal, the transmission Darius had sent. They found the anomaly, a digital burst from the ridge. Lock down the sector, the IRGC commander ordered. Find the car. Find the man. Darius was 3 miles up the trail when he heard the helicopters. 2 Bell 214s painted in military camouflage swept low over the valley floor. He threw himself under a rocky overhang, pressing his body into the dust. The rotor wash kicked up a cloud of grit. They were hunting, and they were close. Chapter 11. The smugglers' route night fell, bringing a biting cold to the mountains. Darius moved by starlight. He couldn't use a flashlight. He navigated by memory and the contours of the peaks. He reached the rendezvous point at 030. It was a lonely lay-by on the Haraz Road, a treacherous highway that winded through the mountains toward the Caspian. A truck pulled over. It was carrying a load of sheep. The driver, a Kurdish man with a face carved from granite, stepped out and checked the tires. This was the signal. Darius emerged from the shadows. The mountain passes are cold tonight, he said in Kurdish. The driver didn't smile. The sheep are warm. Get in. He wasn't invited into the cab. He was ushered into a hidden compartment beneath the truck bed, a claustrophobic steel box sandwiched between the chassis and the livestock floor. It smelled of manure, diesel, and rust. Don't make a sound, the driver said. We have 3 checkpoints before the border. The journey was a nightmare. The truck bounced and slammed over the potholes. Darius lay in the dark, his body aching, his mind racing. The first checkpoint was routine. He heard the soldiers asking for papers, the driver joking about the smell of the sheep. They waved him through. The second checkpoint, near Tabriz, was different. The truck stopped. Voices were raised. Step out, a soldier commanded. We need to inspect the cargo. Darius held his breath. He heard boots crunching on the gravel, the bleating of the sheep. Why are you driving at night? The soldier asked. Fresh meat for the markets in Urmia, the driver replied calmly. You want a lamb? Take one. My gift. There was a pause. The bribery was unspoken but understood. Go, the soldier grunted. But drive slow. The truck lurched forward. Darius exhaled. They drove for another 6 hours, reaching the mountainous border region where Iran, Turkey, and Iraq converge. This was smuggling country. The truck stopped in a remote village. The driver opened the compartment. End of the line for the truck. Now we walk. A team of Kurdish Peshmerga, unofficial allies who worked the smuggling routes, took over. They guided Darius through the minefields and mountain paths that bypassed the official border crossings. They moved like shadows, silent and sure-footed. They crossed a freezing river, the water up to their waists. On the other side was Turkey, NATO territory, Safety. A black van was waiting on a dirt road. A man in a suit stepped out. He didn't look like a smuggler. He looked like a diplomat. "Welcome back, Darius," the man said in Hebrew. Chapter 12. The ghost fades. 3 days later, Darius Vahidi ceased to exist. His digital footprint was slowly erased. The shell company, Vahidi Solutions, was dissolved. The apartment in Tehran was abandoned, the lease allowed to lapse. The man who had been Darius sat in a debriefing room in Tel Aviv. The air conditioning was cool and clean. The coffee was strong. The director of Mossad sat across from him. On the table was a file containing high-resolution satellite images of Kojir. The fires burned for 4 days. The director said, "Facility 404 is a loss. The structural integrity of the underground chambers is compromised. The transformer explosion fused the main power conduits. They won't be building missiles there for at least 2 years. And the cover story?" Darius asked. "The Iranians are sticking to electrical malfunction due to aging infrastructure." The director smiled thinly. "They arrested 3 of their own maintenance managers for negligence. Moradi, your friend, he was questioned but released. His work order for the replacement part actually saved him. It made him look like he was trying to fix the problem before it happened. He is considered a diligent, if unlucky, employee." Darius nodded, a wave of relief washing over him. He hadn't wanted Moradi to pay the price. "The Chinese manufacturer of the AVRs is confused," the director continued. "They swear the unit wasn't defective, but nobody trusts Chinese quality control anyway. It's a perfect circle of blame." "And the Trojan units?" "The one at Node 9 vaporized. The others in the warehouse. We'll let them sit. Maybe they end up in a grid somewhere else. Maybe they don't. It keeps them paranoid." Darius leaned back. He looked at his hands. They were clean, but he could still feel the grit of the Alborz Mountains under his fingernails. "You did good work," the director said, closing the file. "Take a month. Go to Eilat. Disappear." "I'm already gone," Darius said. He walked out of the headquarters and into the blinding sun of Tel Aviv. The city was noisy, alive, oblivious to the fact that a missile factory 1,000 miles away had almost changed the future. People walked their dogs, drank juice, shouted into phones. They didn't know about Node 9. They didn't know about the tap changer or the Kurdish smuggler or the silence of the mountains, and that was the point. The victory wasn't the explosion. The victory was the silence, the normalcy. Darius Vahidi melted into the crowd, just another face in the street, a man who wasn't there, leaving behind a world that was safer because of a simple, catastrophic electrical fault.